Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are delving through the profile of Jadarian Price. We're going to take a look at his profile, his projected size and weight, take a look at his production profile, injury history, offensive environment this season, take a look at some box scores against ranked competition, take a look at some advanced stats, take a look at some highlights while I describe some of his strengths and potential areas to improve upon, take a look at where he might be drafted in terms of IRL draft capital and a couple of potential landing spots that make sense, and then finally, what we can expect from him in Dynasty. And so watch to the end of this video and you should have a pretty good idea. Moving on to Price's height and weight, both PFF and NFL Draft Buzz have him listed at 5'11". That would be 57th percentile height among collegiate running back prospects. Now, there's a 1 pound discrepancy at 209 pounds versus 210 pounds. Essentially the same thing, right? If he ends up being 209 pounds, that would be 38th percentile weight among collegiate running back prospects. And if the 209 pounds is true, that'd be a 29.1 BMI as opposed to a 29.3 if he ends up being 210. Not a big difference. And both are below the threshold at 30.0 or higher that we typically want to see if running backs are going to be, full-time workhorses at the next level. You don't necessarily have to meet that threshold, but typically running backs that are bell cow backs do meet that threshold. To be fair, he was never used as a bell cow, but at the same time, when you play with Jeremiah Love, if you're relegating Jeremiah Love to the bench and you're the bell cow, you probably have to be an ultra generational talent, in my opinion. Because while I don't think Jeremiah Love is a generational talent, I think he's an incredible prospect, right on par with Ashton Genty of last season. So it makes sense why he wouldn't be demanding the entire backfield to himself. He'd have to be an insane talent. But he is very, very talented. I don't mean that as a slight to him in any way, shape, or form. Moving on to his projected 40 time per NFL Draft Buzz, he's supposed to run a 4.44, which if true would be 86th percentile. Now, I don't really care as much about combine times unless they are just obscenely slow. Because I think it's much more important to see how they look on the field. Running an underwear in a straight line isn't as impressive to me as pulling away in a collegiate game, for instance. But it also at the same time really wouldn't shock me if he runs a little bit faster than 4.44 at the combine. Taking a look at his production profile, he theoretically should have been able to play in 2022, was injured. We'll get into that when we break down his career injury history. But please note that. But another thing to note is he had a remaining year of eligibility and he could have returned, but he chose to declare for the draft. So I'd imagine the committee is suggesting he's probably going to at least be a third-round pick in the upcoming draft. Otherwise, it really wouldn't make too much sense to declare if he was going to be a fifth to sixth or undrafted player with another year of eligibility. So the draft community probably thinks pretty highly of him. But taking a look at his production in 2023, when he was able to play, 47 attempts, 272 rushing yards, 5.8 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, no fumbles, and a career best 83.3 PFF rush grade. And as you can see, sparingly used in the passing game, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 65 yards, 13.0 yards per reception is nice, but on limited volume and a touchdown. To go along with the career best PFF receiving grade of 73.4. Then saw significantly more volume, at least comparatively, in 2024, bumping up his usage to 121 rush attempts, 744 rushing yards, a devastating 6.1 yards per attempt. That's a really good number. 7 rushing touchdowns, did fumble 1 time, an 80.4 PFF rush grade, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 10 receiving yards, 2.5 yards per reception, no touchdown, and a 51.1 PFF receiving grade. Then this season, 113 attempts, 674 rushing yards, respectable once again, 6.0 yards per attempt. So 2 straight seasons over 6 yards per attempt, 11 rushing touchdowns, did fumble 3 times. That is something to note on limited volume. That is worrisome. A 79.9 PFF rush grade, 7 targets, 6 receptions, 87 yards, 14.5 yards per reception on limited volume, 2 receiving touchdowns, and a 66.9 PFF receiving grade. So as you can see, he is very efficient on the ground with the usage in which he's been given. And while he does have some big plays in the receiving game, he's used sparingly. We'll get into some of his strengths and potential areas to improve upon a little bit later. But as you can see, efficient runner and sparingly used in the pass game. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, he did miss 2022 with injury. That was because he ruptured his left Achilles tendon. Now, that is a devastating injury, but he was able to return the next 3 seasons, was really efficient on the ground, is an explosive player, and otherwise really hasn't had significant injuries. So definitely a little, probably a red flag as far as that's concerned, but this isn't one of these guys that's always dealing with something at the same time. So I wouldn't describe his injury history as the biggest red flag of this class or anything. Now, taking a look at his situation, specifically his offensive line play, um, Notre Dame ranked as the 45th best run blocking unit at a 65.5 grade. Not elite by any means, but definitely good enough. But, both he and Jeremiah Love were extremely efficient on the ground. So having a pretty decent offensive line, but then also having really good running backs running behind it is going to lead to success. Now, taking a look at how he's performed against ranked competition, he's played a total of 4 games this season against ranked teams. In his first game against ranked competition against number 10 at the time, Miami, in a 27-24 loss, had 6 carries for 45 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, no touchdown with a long of 30. Did fumble 1 time. Overall, pretty efficient on somewhat limited volume on the ground, but the fumble is worrisome. They didn't end up losing it, so that's good. Next game against number 16 at the time, Texas A&M, in a 41-40 loss. 12 attempts, 68 yards, 5.7 yards per attempt, 2 rushing touchdowns with a long of 24. Very efficient once again for a second straight week, but this time on twice the amount of volume. 2 rushing touchdowns. Pretty solid game. Once again, for a second consecutive game, not really used in the receiving game. Against number 20 at the time, USC, 13 attempts for 87 yards, 6.7 yards per attempt, a rushing touchdown, a long of 32, and then 1 reception for 9 yards through the air. Once again, for a third straight game against ranked competition and 2 games with at least 10 plus rush attempts, was extremely efficient. 3 touchdowns in 3 games so far for him. But taking a look against number 22 at the time, Pittsburgh, 8 attempts for 21 yards on the ground, 2.6 yards per attempt, no touchdown with a long of 13, not used through the receiving game at all. Not very efficient there. But in general, as you can see throughout most of these games, he's been pretty efficient on the ground with limited volume, a serious touchdown threat, albeit not really used too often in the receiving game, although he does at times produce these explosive gains, as you can see by his 35-yard reception for a touchdown against Arkansas. And then, against Stanford, having 3 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown there as well. But once again, did fumble 3 times on the season on limited volume, and that is a little bit concerning, albeit in the grand scheme of things, he was very efficient against these ranked teams. Moving on to some advanced stats, I took a look at FBS running backs with 100 or more rush attempts. That was a sample size of 165 running backs. Price received 113 attempts on the season. I'm taking a look at his yards per attempt to 6.0. We're tied for 27th in the sample size. Really good number. And his second straight season with 6.0 or higher yards per attempt. And, even in his first season, 5.8 is a solid number as well. His yak per attempt of 3.92 yards is 25th in the sample size. He has really good contact balance, and that speed converts to power. His breakaway run percentage of 45% is 31st in the sample size. That's rushes of 15 or more yards. So he is not only powerful, he's an explosive running back as well. His PFF rush grade of 79.9 was tied for 91st, so not particularly great if you care about PFF grades. His receiving grade of 66.9 was 42nd. Really limited volume. He did have some explosive plays on that limited volume, but not enough of a sample size to really be too meaningful, in my opinion, at least. His yards per out run, same thing. 1.23 is tied for 38th, but really limited volume there. But his elusiveness rating of 112.0 is 24th. He is really elusive in the open field. I'm going to say this right now. Some of his weaving in and out of traffic really reminds me of Bucky Irving, even though as players they're really different. But that aspect of his game really does remind me of Bucky. And you'll see that when we take a look at some of the highlights while I explain some of his strengths and potential areas to improve upon. Taking a look at his missed tackles forced. Now, his 30 total were 80th, but he received a lot less volume than some of these running backs that were total bell cows, right? So taking a look at his per attempt mark, his 0.27 is 46 in the sample size. That is a really good number. He's elusive. He makes people miss. No question about that. You'll see when we take a look at some of the plays he's made a little bit later. His 674 yards on 56.1 per game isn't that great, but once again, limited volume, very efficient. 87 receiving yards at 7.3 per game, sparingly used there, but did, to be fair to him, get some explosive gains there, and had 13 total touchdowns on the season. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mage Jack, Infamy MTG, AOYOB, The Dawn, and Any Buckeye. Thank you guys. I'm doing this full time now, and without your support, this would not be possible. If you'd like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in both the comment section and description of this video. You'll receive not only, but including access to a Discord where we have a channel where we have NFL and college football talk, as well as a channel where we have fantasy football talk, and a third channel where we laugh at poor trade offers that we've been offered in fantasy football. But if you'd like to, you can always DM me with private, questions if you don't wish for it to be known by any community members. But you'll also get help with building your fantasy football teams every year. I'll use wins above replacement, as well as just looking at the general lineup and scoring settings to help you with your teams each year. I'll help you with trades that are advantageous based on those factors as well. You'll be part of a fun and growing active community. You'll not only receive access to videos early guaranteed, but you'll also have the ability to ask for personal videos that you and only you can view. Or potentially, if you'd like something to be shown on the channel, you'll have preferential treatment there as well. So please consider becoming a member. I'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video. While some highlights demonstrate some of what I'm going to be mentioning here, I'm going to read you a brief around 3 to 4 minute synopsis in which I've written about Price. So Jadarian Price is a dynamic running back out of Notre Dame. He stands at 5'11" and 210 pounds, giving him a BMI of 29.3, which does not meet the threshold of 30.0 or higher to typically have the build to be a bell cow back at the next level. He's also never been used as a bell cow, although, once again, that makes sense when you're playing beside Jeremiah Love. He's an incredible prospect, so to relegate Love to the bench, you'd have to be probably a generational prospect. But he has above average speed to take it to the house with regularity, but his best individual trait is his insane burst. It is insane. One thing about the burst is that it's not only insane when he's headed straight forwards north, but he's able to demonstrate the same level of burst when changing direction somewhat laterally, weaving in and out, which is absolutely incredible. And it really shows in the return game where he is also elite, having 2 return touchdowns this season. He's a great fit for his zone scheme where he demonstrates great vision, and he, over the course of the season, became considerably more consistent with his vision. So I like to see improvement. And he's fine in a gap scheme as well, in my opinion. He has great contact balance, and he can get some power when he hits the hole hard. You saw his yak was, I believe about 25th to 30th out of that sample size. So really physical player when he needs to be. But he's also dynamic in the open field, and his ability to weave in and out of traffic while not only keeping his speed, but with bursts of acceleration really does remind me of Bucky Irving. But as far as pass pro is concerned, he needs to drastically improve if he's going to be involved here at the next level. And it did keep him off the field on passing downs in favor of Jeremiah Love, who once again is just a dynamic player. But he also isn't much of a receiver as far as his route tree is concerned. But, he can catch dump offs and is effective in the open field after the catch. So I think you could probably use him in the screen game if you wanted to. He also had 3 fumbles on the year on limited volume. So ball security needs to be addressed if he's going to be on the field. And, he still had a year of eligibility, but already declared for the draft, suggesting he's almost certainly going at least in round 3. As he otherwise could have just returned and probably had a better season next year with more volume. And so overall, I think he'd be a great asset to a team as a dynamic primary rusher who is elite in the return game, especially with the new rules, but will likely not be used on third downs without substantial improvement in pass protection. Moving on to his projected draft capital, per NFL Draft Fuzz, he's supposed to be a late second round pick. I believe it. It makes sense. I think that's a good spot for him. Could be a third round pick, but regardless, I'd be pretty surprised if he falls later than that, given that he chose to declare early. Moving on to, once again, a brief summarization of his strengths and potential areas to improve upon. He has elite burst, some of the best in the class. It's dynamic. It even works somewhat laterally like that. So it's pretty crazy. He's a very creative rusher. He'll weave in and out. It reminds me a lot of Bucky Irving in that way, even though they're different players. His contact balance is very good. His yak per attempt was very, very high up there in the sample size. And his vision in his zone scheme drastically improved, and is very, very good at this point, in my opinion. But potential areas to improve upon: his receiving ability, sparingly used, did see some explosive gains, but pass pro is also an issue. So those two things combined together, a limited route tree and pass protection issues, probably not going to be a third down back without significant improvement, at least in pass protection, but probably at both. And ball security, 3 fumbles on 113 rush attempts is a significant number. So ball security is going to have to be cleaned up if he's going to see work at the next level. Now, moving on to my pro comparison, I think he resembles Kenneth Walker as a runner, a little bit of Bucky Irving too. Now, I think that Kenneth Walker is a little bit better of a prospect. I think he was I think he was better in pass protection for sure, and a little bit better as a receiver as well. But I think as a rusher, he does resemble Kenneth Walker. So when we talk about creativity, the ability to weave in and out, really good contact balance, explosive burst and change of direction, really good in his own scheme with the vision, he resembles Kenneth Walker to me. I saw online a comp to Raheem Mostert. I definitely think, the burst and top end speed of Mostert is shown in price, but I think he's more talented than Raheem Mostert as a rusher personally. Where do I think he'll probably be ranked by the Dynasty community? I think somewhere around RB 16 to 25 if he gets that second round draft capital. If he gets third round draft capital, probably closer to the 25, potentially a little bit lower. But I'm of the opinion that he does get late second round capital. Where would I personally take him in rookie drafts? If he gets second round draft capital and goes to a pretty good spot, I could see late round 1 for him, but probably somewhere in, mid round 2 if I had to guess. Once again, all of these, where would I take him? It's so contingent on landing spot and draft capital for these guys. So I'm just working off of the information I have right now. In terms of a couple of potential fits, I think the Eagles at 54th, they could really look to get some juice behind Saquon Barkley as he potentially ages out. I think the Texans at 59th, they could really use somebody that's dynamic in the run game. And I definitely think that he and Woody Marks could be a pretty good duo. I think the Seahawks at 64th, K9 could be a free agent. They may not re-sign him, and I think they could get somebody that's probably not quite as good of a prospect coming out and might not end up being quite as good as Kenneth Walker, but I think they could get a similar type of player and potentially just not have to pay him as much as they would Walker. So that's something that could be interesting. And I think in the early third round, the Titans at 66, they could really use some juice on the ground with Tony Pollard aging out as well. But yeah, I think some of these are realistic landing spots. And man, if he went to the Eagles and they eventually move on from Saquon Barkley, I think he could be lethal in that backfield, although it would take a minute, obviously, for him to potentially see the volume necessary. Moving on to my current running back rankings, understand that we don't have the draft capital or landing spots, so some of these things are probably going to change. But here's how I see it right now. In tier 1, I have Jeremiah Love, to nobody's surprise. I think he resembles Jahmyr Gibbs. He's dynamic as a rusher and a receiver, great vision, great agility, great creativity, can be used vertically as a receiver, a complete back, and he's going to be taken in round 1. Easy tier 1. In tier 2, I have Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska. I think he resembles Travion Henderson. I think he's dynamic in the receiving game. You're going to get some explosives with him. I think he has pretty good burst, albeit, somewhat average long speed, but very creative rusher. I think he's a complete player. In tier 3, I have, once again, Price. I think he resembles Kenneth Walker as a rusher, really explosive, insane burst. He'll weave in and out of traffic with ease, really good contact balance, great fit in a zone scheme, but can get it done in a gap scheme. Albeit with limited receiving upside and third down usage, probably initially, until he gets substantially better in pass pro at the very least. Katron Allen, somebody that reminds me of Ramondre Stevenson, very, very powerful, very nimble for a back of his size. Not the biggest threat in the receiving game, but once again, when you have Singleton there, who's much better in the receiving game, it makes sense that they wouldn't have given him as much usage there. But I still think he's a very good player. Jonah Coleman in tier 3, he reminds me of James Robinson. Somebody that, is just a solid player. Doesn't really have that top end speed, but pretty good change of direction, pretty good power, in my opinion. And in tier 4, I have Nicholas Singleton. He reminds me of Latavius Murray, kind of a bigger, heavier running back, but is more of a straight line type of player, really lacks the wiggle. But at the same time, he is dynamic as a receiver and can be used vertically down the field. So he does have some upside to him as well. And so where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Let me know below in the comment section. Is there anything I perhaps forgot to mention in the video that you think is pertinent here? If so, let me know below in the comment section. What are your current running back rankings? If you want to drop those below, it's always a good discussion. Nothing toxic ever happens when we do that, right? But and if you appreciate these videos and you want to support the channel, I would really appreciate it if you would support me via Patreon. Thank you to all my Patreon members. Without your support, this wouldn't be possible. And if you cannot or do not wish to, if you could just like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, I'd really appreciate it. With all that being said, thank you and have a good day.